Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sandeep Kishore, a moderator of the Young Professionals Chronic Disease Network here at the Global Health Delivery Project. Here we start a session called YP Live with young emerging champions in global health delivery and practice. Please do tweet using the hashtag YP Live, especially if you have questions for our guests. So today's actually a special day for me personally. Our first guest is Seun Adebiyi, a personal friend, as well as a wonderful colleague who has stood in solidarity with patients and providers alike. And what we're going to do today is explore Seun's journey from start to finish, first as a patient, and then as a provider, and then as an emerging champion and leader. And Seun has kindly indicated that I may ask anything and everything to dig deep in this session. So Seun, welcome.
Hi, Sunny. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. We've been through a lot together, and I'm excited for this chat.
Perfect. Well, so Seun, first for the audience, I wanted them to get a chance to know, I guess, about your origin. So let's rewind the tape. Take me back. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
I was born in Nigeria in 1983, and my mom and I moved to the U.S. when I was 6 years old. So I actually grew up in Alabama, which is a random place for a kid from West Africa. My mom was a mathematics professor, but she decided to start a nonprofit to tutor inner city kids. Unfortunately, that didn't pay enough to cover our bills, so during the summers, I would pick crops with my mother just to make ends meet. And it was a sacrifice that she did so that she could have an impact in the community, and that became my role model. I mean, she's a brilliant scientist. She was literally a rocket scientist for NASA. She went to Oxford on a full scholarship, and here she is, picking vegetables in the hot summer sun in Alabama so that someone else's child can have a chance at a college education. So that was the shaping force in my life.
Wow, that's actually incredibly powerful. I actually didn't know that part about you, Seun. And if you could say something to her now, like, what would you say?
Hi, Mom. I mean, she knows that she's had an impact on me based on the kind of life I've led to date, and I think that's probably all that she could ask for.
That's incredible, and I'm sure she's incredibly proud of you, Seun. And it was just Mother's Day, so this is incredibly timely. What better product can a mother have than a kid like you? Well, so Seun, can you tell me a little bit about then your sort of as you grew up, where did you train and what did you start thinking that you were going to be doing with the rest of your life?
Yes, so as far as training, I was a competitive swimmer for 16 years. It started out just as a way to keep me out of trouble. I was basically getting detention in elementary school almost every single day. And so I was enrolled in an after-swim program just to keep me occupied. But I took to the water, and by the time I was 16, I was actually a nationally ranked swimmer and on track to compete for Nigeria. Unfortunately, just before the 2000 Olympics, I fractured my spine, and I had to sit out. So I left swimming for a while. I went to college. I studied mathematics like my mother. And then I tried out again 4 years later for the 2004 Olympic team. And this time I missed the Olympics by a tenth of a second.
A tenth of a second.
So at that point, I was done with swimming. And I graduated from college, went to law school. And then about my third year of law school, I started thinking about the Olympics again. But I decided to be more strategic about this. And I asked myself, what's the easiest way to get to the Olympics? So I'm in a unique position of being a dual citizen. And so I thought, well, Nigeria doesn't have winter, so if I competed in a Winter Olympic sport, I wouldn't have any competition. So I literally called together some friends of mine from law school. We sat around having a barbecue, and we went through the different Winter Olympic sports on YouTube until we found one that we thought I could do. And people laugh and say, "Oh, that's so cool running." So in fact, my coach for the sport that I picked, which is called skeleton, was the coach of the Jamaican bobsled team. So
I love cool running. I absolutely love that's right. That's incredible. And so, and describe what skeleton is, because it's different than the bobsled or the luge, right?
Yeah. So bobsled is, the one in Cool Runnings where 4 guys jump into a car and they slide down an ice chute. Skeleton is on the same track, except it's just you, and you're jumping on a sled head first, and you go up to 80 miles an hour with no brakes.
And you do this competitively, so it's you guys are pushing each other to go faster.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. And so then, what happened with that? With the Winter Olympic dream?
Well, it's still alive. It's turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. I mean, when I looked at it, I said, well, this can't be too hard. If you don't kill yourself, basically all you have to do is take 10 steps and do a belly flop and then hold on for dear life. So the actual sport is not that difficult, but all the logistics that go into it. So I actually had to create a Winter Olympic Federation for Nigeria. So you can just try to imagine describing skeleton to the Olympic Committee of a country that's never seen snow. But that was a hard sell. But I finally got them on board. And then it was a question of convincing the international community that it wasn't a scam. Because I used to send all these emails trying to raise support, and then I wouldn't ever get responses. So I started to wonder why. Then I actually read one of my emails, like, "Hi, I'm from Nigeria, and I'm competing for the Olympics." I mean, it totally sounds like one of those scams where people ask for your bank account. But I was like, I swear I'm legit. So it's been kind of things I didn't anticipate that it slowed down. But I'm still on track for 2018.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's incredible. I mean, oh my God. Well, so Seun, so then along this journey, you had something happen to you that I think defined a lot of who you are. You at some point got diagnosed with not one but two blood cancers. Can you walk us through that diagnosis and that sort of experience? I mean, I'll have a lot of questions here, but can you just launch into it a bit? Where were you? What happened?
Sure. Well, it was my third year of law school in January 2009. And I had noticed some small lumps in my lymph nodes, like more in my inguinal lymph nodes near the groin. I went to the student health center to get checked out, and they said, well, it's probably just the flu or something like that. Give it some time. I did, but by the time graduation rolled around in May, they were the size of golf balls. So I went back. This time they did a biopsy, and I remember the surgeon walked into the room about a week later. I knew something was wrong because they told me to come in right away. And he didn't have the best bedside manner. He just says, there's no easy way to put this. I'm just going to tell you. You have lymphoma. So, I mean, this was the first time I'd heard of lymphoma. So I asked him what that meant. And, he said he would refer me to an oncologist at the Yale School of Medicine to start chemotherapy immediately. This was lymphoblastic lymphoma, generally very aggressive. Then I asked for a second opinion, so they sent it to a hospital in New York to do the test. It came back positive, confirmed. I went to the School of Medicine, and I had a kind of surreal experience. The physician there took a look at me, and then he said, based on your reports, I was prepared to admit you to start chemotherapy. However, looking at you right now, you don't look sick, so I don't think you actually have lymphoma. So I was like, that's a little weird. What now? So he decided to do a bone marrow aspirate. And then things got really wonky when they couldn't aspirate any bone marrow.
Whoa.
That was, instead of bone marrow, I had scar tissue. And this turned into a very complicated case. It got bounced around a lot of different hospitals. Different specialists looked at it. And finally, an oncologist at the University of Utah came up with this diagnosis called stem cell leukemia. And from a layman's perspective, the way I understand it is that there was something wrong with my stem cells. And those stem cells that were supposed to mature in the lymphoid lineage to become lymph cells were turning into lymphoma. And the stem cells that were supposed to turn into bone marrow in the myeloid lineage were turning into scar tissue. And things got a whole lot more serious at this point because chemotherapy wasn't able to reach the root of the problem. It could address the adult stem cells, but without a stem cell transplant, a complete system reset, it would just be a matter of time before I was relapsed. So the only option at that point was to find a stem cell donor for bone marrow stem cell transplant.
Good God. Okay. Well, so there's a lot of things here. So one is, when you first found that out, that you were diagnosed with pretty serious depletion of your marrow, what was going through your head at that time? I mean, you were pretty young. You were a third-year law student at Yale. I mean, what was going through your mind?
My initial reaction was kind of numb. I mean, this was something that I'd never imagined for myself. I was, kind of on the cusp of entering grown-up life. I'd spent my whole life sheltered in school, and I was just about to spread my wings, and then suddenly, got a diagnosis that, in a lot of cases, is terminal. I remember I went out to the New Haven Green and sat out with two of my friends who were there, and everything was just a lot brighter. And I remember the colors were more vivid. I was a lot more aware of the temperature. Like, I mean, it's suddenly when you sort of see that, I mean, we all have a clock ticking above our heads invisibly, but when that clock suddenly turns visible and you start seeing your life, not in terms of years, but in terms of days or weeks, everything just takes on a special value. And at the same time, though, I was very afraid, but a part of me was also kind of excited because I thought, if this doesn't kill me, I'm going to have one hell of a story.
Seun, you mentioned, and I think this is relevant for myself as a medical student about to become a doctor, and as well as young professionals across the world who are providers. You mentioned something about the bedside manner. And can you talk a little bit about that, how your sort of interface as a patient was in the healthcare system, and any advice you might have for emerging providers or providers the world over?
Sure. I mean, looking back, even at the time of the diagnosis, I could tell that the doctor was more nervous than I was when he walked in the room. And I think maybe he was just afraid of what my reaction would be. He seemed completely unprepared to give me this news. So in the moment, I was more concerned about making sure he didn't feel uncomfortable than I was thinking about myself. I remember I took the news very calmly, didn't really show any emotion, and just like, all right, as if we were talking about the weather. And in honesty, it took me a long time to actually open up to my healthcare providers about how I was feeling about the whole experience. And it was through a program at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital that a team of psychiatrists came during my transplant. I'm jumping ahead, but they asked me, how are you feeling? You seem really depressed, and I kind of wanted to say like, well, no shit, but I didn't really know what their purpose was, and it took a solid two years before I finally got to the point where I could talk about how this experience affected me emotionally. I mean,
wow.
The first thing I tried to do was just to pick myself up and just plow on as if nothing had happened after my transplant. And that didn't work. And, I'll come back to that later. But
yeah.
For providers, I would say that, just be aware that there is a psychological component to any health trauma. And oftentimes that healing takes longer than the physical recovery. And so if we really think of the patient as a dynamic being, as opposed to just like a silo to receive different protocols and treatments, if we look at the whole picture, every doctor, every prescriber in the touch point has to be aware of the psychological component of care. Even if you're not a specialist in that field, I think there's a certain minimum awareness and education that you need to have in order to do your job well.
That's a very, very powerful lesson, Seun. I think it's honestly something providers, and we have all sorts of excuses. Oh, there's a lot of time pressure. We have to fill out our paperwork. We have to do this and that. But I think you're raising something that's critical to patient-centered care. Well, so
it's not an easy ask because, you know, in order for a provider to really be open to that experience in a patient, there's a lot of soul searching that has to go on. Because I think doctors are trained to see death as failure, you know, and anything that smacks of that, whether it's, you know, fears about mortality that the patient might have, might trigger something in their own doctor about, well, what does this mean for me if this patient is not? So there's certain areas that I can understand why doctors don't want to go there mentally. And then, I mean, there's also just the emotional drain of, you know, having to shield and protect yourself. So it's a balance that I think people have to find, but it's just something to be aware of and to think about.
It's actually really insightful because we often think about disease and mortality as exactly as you say, a failure. And when you're confronted with it, you do everything you can, including putting your guard up. And I think sometimes that means you don't connect as readily with patients because you're so vulnerable yourself. That's very interesting insight. It's almost like we need more patients to come to talk to providers about their psychosocial needs and what they've gone through and how just one whisper or just one word. I mean, you remember the very moment and the sentence that the physician used. It might have been just one patient in his day, but this is something that you remember for your whole life. So every sentence, even a word, is quite important, it seems like.
Very true.
Well, so then tell me what happened. So then you had this, and then you obviously needed a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant. What happened next?
Well, my doctor sent in a donor search request to the Bone Marrow Registry of the U.S. And there are 10 million, excuse me, there are 10 million people on this registry. The overwhelming proportion of them, like 80% of them, are Caucasian. African Americans, I think, make up somewhere around 10%, maybe less. And so not surprisingly, I couldn't find a match. So I decided to start hosting bone marrow donor drives. And I partnered up with a couple of different organizations who had the technical skills. And what I found was they were looking for patients to put a face on their mission. So it was a very good fit, and we ended up recruiting, you know, over 10,000 people at multiple bone marrow donor drives, but I still couldn't find a match for myself. And it got to the point about, you know, 5 or 6 months in, I'd already done one round of chemo just to kind of keep the lymphoma contained, and really thinking as I would walk down the street, looking at people and saying, I wonder which one of these people could save my life. And it really broke down a lot of internal barriers I had where, you know, I tended to kind of keep myself, you know, say, well, this is my life and I've got my plans, but I had reached the point in my life where I couldn't go any further on my own. And everything that I had depended on someone else. And that person would be a complete stranger and there was nothing I could offer them. And the only thing that would motivate them was a sense of altruism. So it was a very humbling experience. And I basically decided that if I did get that gift, that the only way I could pay it back was to somehow live a life that was worthy of it. And so I decided to host a bone marrow drive in Nigeria. And it was kind of a last-ditch attempt to find a matching donor because the way it works, they match donors based on these genetic markers. They're called human leukocyte antigens. And your highest compatibility is within your own ethnic group. So as I said earlier, I'm from Nigeria. So Nigeria didn't have a bone marrow registry. But I found a workaround where I could do the bone marrow drive in the U.S. and then South Africa said that they would store the donors for me. So I got my company that I was working at to donate money to type up to 300 people. I got cheek swab kits. I had everything ready to go. And the day that I was about to board the plane to fly to Lagos, I got a call from the hospital, and they said, come in right away.
Oh, my God.
And I went in, and my oncologist came into the room, and she says, found a donor. There's a nice woman who's come she's come and she's given birth, and she donated the umbilical cord of her newborn baby, which has a lot of stem cells, and those stem cells match you. So her advice to me was call off the drive. At this point, I was very immune suppressed, so going to Africa, where there's, especially West Africa, Nigeria, where there's a lot of malaria and chances for infection, she thought this was a really stupid idea. She said it was very laudable, but she said, first get your transplant done, heal, and then you can come back and do this stuff. So basically, save yourself first, and then try to save the world. But as I was just explaining to you, the promise I'd made was if I did get this chance, I had to live a life that was worthy of it. So I actually decided to do the drive anyway. So I got on a plane, we went to Nigeria, and we had 1 day of advance notice. We held it at the Nigeria Law School in Vegas. And basically I showed up on the last day of classes before Christmas break, and I told them my story. I told them that I was a law student just like them, that I had cancer, and that I was looking for one of them to save my life. And every single person in that auditorium registered. We ran out of kits. I'd never seen a response like that, and that's when the seeds of the registry were planted in my mind, because I thought people are tired of watching their family members die needlessly from curable diseases. If we just build the tools for them to get involved, the will is there. So I held the drive. Unfortunately, my doctor was right. I did get sick, and I almost died. I had a complication where basically the chemotherapy paralyzed my intestines, my colon almost ruptured, and I went for 3 weeks. Just they couldn't give me morphine because that would slow down the peristalsis even further, and that was a very challenging time. During that time period, a fellow leukemia patient in Sloan Kettering also died. Her name was Eva, and we had sort of been each other's rock. And there's a certain point where you're just like, no one knows what I'm going through, but when there's another patient, you're both staring this thing in the face, and you're helping each other, and then one of you falls. It's just, there was a part of me that also died with her, and so to be in this incredible physical pain, and then incredible emotional pain, and then from there, basically be rushed into transplant, which was a whole nother level of suffering. So they had a high-dose chemotherapy and then 11 rounds of whole-body radiation, which literally charred the skin off my body. I mean, when they would change the sheets, like the sheets would be covered in black from the skin that peeled off. I mean, I was in an incubator. I couldn't go outside. I was too weak to walk. I was basically fed through an IV for 8 weeks. And that was definitely the lowest point of my life. But I think it was also kind of this reforging period where kind of this identity that I built up for myself was completely obliterated. And then something else was born. And it was born through the altruism of someone else. The stem cells that were planted to me slowly started to repopulate. And in fact, if you took a blood sample, you would think I was about 3.5 years old because I'm 100% donor now. So in a sense, I've really sort of died and been reborn. And with that rebirth has come a completely different purpose and mission in life.
Okay, I just want to take a moment here because that was a lot. In your humility, in the way that you sort of tell that story, but also your experience. I mean, I just want to comment on your resolve to still go to Nigeria, even when you're a doctor. And as a medical provider, I'd say that was pretty stupid. But I respect it. I think you made it up in your mind that if you receive a gift, that this is your purpose. And I'm just, that's the sort of passion that I think young professionals need to see. Because I think our generation is in danger of losing it sometimes. And I just want to sort of just respect and honor that for a moment, because that's powerful. You mentioned that that you found a transplant, and it was from a little baby, and that you, in going through that, your identity was obliterated in some ways, but that you were reborn, and you were reborn from altruism and kind of a donation, a gift. And I just think that there's something very important about that we live in a culture of transaction. What can I get? What can I get? and you receive something, a gift, and you want to pay it forward. And I'm personally inspired by that, Seun, because I think it's an important point in global health, in health, in life. Well, so then, Seun, walk me through it a little bit. So you went through this very traumatic experience. You lost your colleague Ava. You have a stem cell transplant, but now you have done a bone marrow drive in Nigeria. Walk me through your inspiration and actually how you pulled it off to get a bone marrow registry in the country of Nigeria, the first ever in the country. Like, just, and I'll ask you lots of questions about this, but tell me about the start of that process and how you went about it.
Yeah. So again, the inspiration for this was twofold. First was my own difficulty finding a donor. I found it shocking that if I were Caucasian, my odds of finding a donor were better than 80%. If I were African American, my odds of finding a donor were less than 20%. And I thought it was just completely unfair that race played such a huge factor in your survival outcome. And then the second part of that was just seeing how people in Nigeria were willing to be part of this registry if we could just bring the technical capacity to them. Now, the actual registry itself is just two computers. I mean, it's just a database to store information. It's just a tool. And so building the registry, it's basically just hooking two laptops to a database. I mean, it's not rocket science. The challenge comes in the mindset, because so many people that I talked to said, this will never work. This is Nigeria. They don't have the capacity. They're more help. I mean, they could give me 1,000 reasons why this wouldn't work. And what I wanted to do was say, yes, but there's at least one reason this will work, and it's because I'm passionate about it. And that passion outweighed all the reasons they came up with that it wouldn't work. And I wanted to change people's mindset to say, if you were as passionate about finding solutions as you are about defending the reasons why the status quo is the way it is, we could solve the world's problems today. I don't have any training in public health. I'm a lawyer by background. I'm the least qualified person to be interviewing. But I'm very passionate about this issue because it saved my life. And as a result, I succeeded where a lot of public health people didn't. Now, for you, Sunny, with the PhD and an MD to come in, with your passion, you can take things to a whole nother level. And with YP, there's so many champions out there, champions in waiting. And I think the missing ingredient is that passion. Because I feel sometimes there are protocols. Like I said, my decision for Nigeria was a very stupid one. And sometimes you have to be willing to do things that look stupid to others in order to get something done. I mean, I knew that if I didn't take that hit to Nigeria, if I didn't hold that drive, the likelihood of there being a registry to start would be very much weaker. But by taking that first step and then the next and then the next, there eventually became the momentum. So the way it actually happened was another YP member, when she heard about the drive, told me that there were a team of doctors in Nigeria who had submitted a proposal to the government to start a bone marrow registry. The proposal hadn't gotten any funding and it just kind of died. So I emailed them. I said, look, I want to start a registry too. And they wrote back and said, sure. Some of them were like, yeah, good luck. And then some of them were like, yes, we really need this. And the ones who are really passionate are the ones I decided to work with. And then what was it that Obama's chief of staff wouldn't say? It's like, never let a good crisis go to waste. So there was basically a crisis where South Africa, after a couple of years, said, we did this as a favor for you, so we're not going to explore your donors forever. You either have to find your own registry or we're going to delete them. So that kind of put my the fire and said, look, if we don't act now, we're going to lose everything that we started with. And you could say that's your fault for putting yourself in this situation and not thinking it through. But I actually think sometimes doing stupid things and having your back up against the wall is what pushes things to happen. So I was basically in this situation at the end of 2011 where I was in jeopardy of losing all the donors that had signed up. And with that, all the money that had gone in, all the preparation, all the logistics. And then with that kind of urgency, things just fell into place. We kind of skipped around all the red tape. People were just like, this has to happen. And we found an IT company to manage our back office. The hospital where the two physicians I was working with were based decided to donate the office space. I donated the computers, and we just, between this very small team just flying by the seat of our pants, we made it happen. But then another YP member wrote this brilliant press release, which I kind of found it hilarious because here we are just like trying to keep the lights on. He made it sound like it was the grandest thing ever, and it got picked up. It was on the front page of the New York Times, like CNN, BBC, just this international news. In fact, the Minister of Health got a phone call from a reporter asking him to comment on the registry. He was like, "What registry?" So then there had to be like emergency meetings to brief the Minister of Health on this incredible thing that happened in this country without him being involved in it.
Oh.
So it was everything that could have. This is not a model that I would say most people should follow. I seem to have gotten it wrong at every single point, but it still worked. And I think if there's one thing I'd say, it's to not be afraid of putting yourself in awkward situations and to capitalize on urgency. And I'm now with the American Cancer Society working on Treat the Pain, which is a much broader initiative than just bone marrow. This is actually working on delivering morphine to patients who are dying from cancer and HIV in developing countries. And we have that same kind of urgency to say, well, these people are in pain right now. If the country doesn't have morphine, you need to get it right now. And I think sometimes with NCDs, because they're chronic, we sometimes miss out on that urgency. And that's what really drives change. When people see that they're going to lose out on something really important, sometimes that's enough to get things rolling.
Wow. Well, Seun, so one question I have then from a political economy standpoint is when the Minister of Health got that call and, there's an Nigerian American sort of doing stuff without him or her necessarily knowing, how did you deal with that? And how did you pull together a movement based on your passion to kind of keep things going and not get stuck in the protocol, as you call it, and the sort of barriers?
Yeah, the simple answer is I didn't. I just kind of punted it to the physicians in Nigeria. What they did was the chief director of the hospital flew to Abuja to meet with the minister and personally brief him. And then they arranged, when the minister came to Enugu to give a lecture, they arranged for me to meet him and then also give him sort of like a 5 to 10 minute rundown of what was actually going on. There are pros and cons to that approach, and I have to be very honest about the downside. Because I didn't involve the ministry at the outset, it will make it much harder to rely on government support to help scale this up.
Right.
However, I also believe that, the job of the government is to protect the people, and if you can make a very clear case for why a bone marrow registry is in the best interest of the Nigerian people, then I think that it's in the government's mission statement, if you will, to make this work. So I'm not too worried about the future in terms of relating to the government. What I am worried about is how to make sure that this registry stays on focus, because it's a very challenging environment to innovate. And I realize that my own technical background is fairly limited, and I have a very steep learning curve. So I'm actually right now just working on solidifying the basics of the registry, sort of putting SOPs in place, incorporating in Nigeria, and all of the basic tools that you need for an organization to stand alone. And then, step by step, we can think about how to expand this in a very cost-efficient and meaningful way.
Beautiful. Well, and Seun, I'm proud as a YP member and a leader to know that YP was standing with you and helping catalyze things. Do you have advice for the latent YP members or young professionals or students across the world who don't know where to begin? Do you sort of have any, one or two sort of pieces of counsel for them?
Yeah, I don't. First of all, I don't see myself as an expert in public health. I'm basically a patient who turned into an advocate and then just kind of got lucky. But when I say I got lucky, I mean that I put myself in situations where I had to learn or I would fail. And so I
Mm.
guess the one piece of advice to say is you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to sometimes make an ass of yourself and look stupid in order to learn the lessons that you need. I mean, I'm in a job now where I'm learning from a fantastic mentor who actually does have the technical skills that I need to really scale this project up. And I don't think I would have gotten into this position if I hadn't made all the mistakes that I made up until this point. And so I think you really have to be willing to take a gamble sometimes and just go out on a limb. When you have a really good idea, you have to trust yourself and say, well, I don't know everything, and maybe I can't accomplish everything at once. But I think it's better to aim big, and then maybe you only get 10% of your goal, but that's still something.
Yeah.
And then you can pick yourself up and try again. I think just the audacity of trying to single-handedly start a national bone marrow registry captured a lot of people's attention the way that something more reasonable might not have. So yeah, I think it's perfectly okay to be stupid and completely unrealistic, because if you're persisting, you'll sometimes find that it's not as unrealistic as everyone wants you to believe it is.
Brilliant. Well then, so what's next for you as you sort of you're at the American Cancer Society now. You're building the tools and basic infrastructure for the registry. But where do you see the work going? Where do you see yourself going?
Yeah. So I mean, I've really spent a lot of time thinking about the context of my work and how I can make the most impact. Obviously, bone marrow is close to my heart because this is what saved my life. But in terms of impact, there are a lot of low-hanging fruit. Nigeria doesn't yet have the capacity to run stem cell transplants on a wide-scale basis. They've done 3 transplants to date. And so the time for the registry to scale up isn't yet here. I mean, there's a lot of just the groundwork that's still being done. But I've really focused my attention on issues that are again have that sense of urgency that need to happen right now, which is increasing access to pain medicine. So I work with Treat the Pain, which basically goes into countries with a high unmet pain need, and they deliver technical advice to figure out why pain isn't in the country. A lot of times, it turns out to be very simple things that once you identify the problem are fairly easy to fix. Another thing that we're working on in Nigeria, now that Nigeria actually has morphine, thanks to Treat the Pain, is getting clinicians to recognize pain in their patients. Because a lot of clinicians will say, pain is not my problem. I'm here to treat. I'm not here to palliate. But I mean, the fact is, every physician needs the awareness, the education, and the skills to be able to adequately address pain. And the good news is, it's fairly straightforward. The WHO has a 3-step analgesic ladder that is effective in 80 to 90% of cases of moderate to severe pain. So right now, what I'm working on is this hospital-based training. It's called the Pain-Free Hospital Initiative. And it's a 1-year, low-cost hospital education program. By the end of it, all clinicians in the hospital should have been trained and should feel comfortable addressing pain and prescribing the appropriate opioids. And we're also tracking this. So building an evidence base. I think one of the biggest hindrances for advocacy in low and middle income countries is the lack of evidence. It's very hard to advocate for change when you don't have a baseline to show why you need that change. So we're building that baseline at the same time, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to expand this program to Kenya and other countries in Africa and perhaps Asia with the same unmet pain need. And I think there's a role for if there are people in those countries, YPers who want to get involved, who want to build their own technical skill set. I think there's definitely ways for us to engage.
Absolutely. Well, see, we're starting to wind down a little bit, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time in closing talking about this transition from being a university student to actually being a young professional to becoming a professional. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about a word you used earlier about identity and this question of purpose and even vulnerability. And I know when we chatted before, I mean, you were in a corporate world before. You were thinking about resources and economic security. Can you walk us through moments in your life when you just had a crisis, when you said, I don't really know what I'm doing, and you made a pivot professionally, and how did you walk through that? I think that would be really useful for us to hear.
I don't know if walk is the word I would use to describe my journey of personal growth. I mean, I kind of, if I look back at my 20s, it's almost like I slipped on a banana peel at the top of a staircase. You know, it's just, I felt like I was lurching from one crisis to another.
Right.
You know, I mean, there was nothing that I could look back on and say, wow, that was really graceful. Right. And so it's kind of odd that at the end of it, you know, when I saw your tagline of like, you know, talking to a champion, I was like, well, that's not how it felt to me. You know, I think the more I get away from it, like I think this is a very common syndrome. I mean, I mean, just when you wake up and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. Everything is going wrong. You're not alone. And oftentimes, you know, the mistakes that you make, the ones that, you know, you bury your head and you wish you could just crawl under your bed, turn out to be some of the best things that have ever happened to you. I mean, the reason I was even looking into the Winter Olympics in 2009 was because it was the middle of the, you know, Great Recession and the financial crisis, and I couldn't get a job. And I made a joke to someone like, you know, it'd actually be easier to qualify for the Olympics than to get a job right now. And then I was like, well, wait a second. So, I mean, the whole thing started out as like a tongue-in-cheek remark because I couldn't get a job. So it's okay to not know what you're doing. I mean, if I had tried to plan out my life 5 years ago, I'd never imagined myself sitting in the American Cancer Society working on an issue that's so dear to my heart. And I'm okay with that. As far as identity, that's something that I'm still struggling with. I don't have the answer. I spent 3 weeks this year just tucked away in an ashram, a very quiet place where I could just sit and just let it sink in, because there's been so much change in my life that, you know, it's very disorienting. I think that's one of the hardest part of transitioning from school, where everything is very structured, to being a young professional where you're out in the world and, you know, no one really explains the rules to you, and you're just kind of like lurking and constantly feeling like you're not enough. I mean, the good news is that this is kind of a rite of passage, and also this is probably the time in your life where you can make the biggest mistakes and people won't hold it against you. So in the same reasoning, like, this is where you can swing the fence and not hold back and do things that are completely stupid and crazy because you're new. I mean, that was my explanation to the Minister of Health of Nigeria. I was like, I didn't know I was supposed to tell you. So it's okay to, I mean, I would say capitalize on this time in your life to just do things that are crazy. I mean, if your, you know, friends are sort of like gasping, then you're, you know, moving in the right direction.
That's brilliant. So if your friends are gasping, you know you're moving in the right direction. I love that as a tagline. Yeah, I agree. I think people become very risk averse as we mature, where we think about sort of different incentives and so forth. And I think you're absolutely right. That protected time to almost carry over the student mentality into the young professional space is crucial. Seun, so do you have any sort of closing thoughts or anything you want to share with the world?
Well, I mean, I hope this has been useful to the people who listen. I know we covered a lot of material, and you know, in terms of specific challenges and technical challenges that maybe some YPers have a very specific idea of what they are passionate about. To them, I'd say, you know, definitely leverage the YP platform as a way to connect with others. The best thing that you can do is to talk to people who know more than yourself. And I feel like we have an incredible wealth of intellectual capital on the YP network. And it's just that, I mean, the network is there as a resource. And, you know, there are people who host like the 3T meetings and so on. So yeah, talk to people and get outside your comfort zone. Don't think of yourself as just this kind of physician or that kind of physician. In the end, we're all working towards the same goals, and we have a lot to teach each other.
Excellent. Well, folks, I think with that, I want to invite you to join the Global Health Delivery Project. Thanks to Marie and Isabel for their wonderful help in setting this up of the Global Health Delivery Project. And please come join the Young Professional Chronic Disease Community, or YP, to meet people like Seun and help us build things together. With that, thank you.